Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah Biller from behind the camera. I know you probably can't see me right now, but I'm the executive director of Vantage Ventures and certainly want to welcome you to another one of our real talks, one where we've had just a minor technical difficulty behind the scenes, but it's a perfect actually situation to do that in because as I was preparing for today's real talks, I couldn't think but help that, you know, every journey begins with one step and then it leads you to many other steps. And that certainly is my history with our guest today, Jacqueline Hampton. I am thrilled and I'm honored to bring to you one of what I consider one of the most important entrepreneurs today, not only in her from her early professional life, but to where she's taking us today. Our journey together, we were reunited about 5 years ago in a meeting in Boston where Jacqueline looked across the table and said, I think I know you. And I laughed and said, no, I just have that face, which none of you can see right now, but I have that face that everybody thinks they know. And it really turns out that Jacqueline was correct. We met when we were 16 in West Virginia. And from here, it's been such a pleasure to see her grow and create a company that I think we'll all be inspired about. But certainly don't want to go on and on about Jacqueline. I know we want to hear, Jacqueline, from you, your voice, your background, and then really engage in a discussion about your own entrepreneurial journey and Portico as a company today. But Jacqueline, if I may, I'm going to turn it over to you just to share a little bit about your background. And no, we're so honored to have you with us.
Okay, thanks, Sarah. And we were able to see your lovely face, so I'm glad I think we figured out technical difficulties. But welcome, everyone. I'm so honored to be here today. As Sarah mentioned, it has been wonderful to reconnect with her over the last 5 years, having met when we were first 16 and in West Virginia quite some time ago. My background and journey has really been a winding path. So it started in Huntington, West Virginia. It started in the same hospital that my dad was born in. And I grew up there my entire life with my 3 older siblings. My dad was in the ministry most of the time, and then he created Woodlands Retirement Community, if some people know that. And my mom was a school teacher. I ended up leaving the state to go to college at Duke in North Carolina, spent some time kind of in the mid-Atlantic area around DC, and then went back to UVA for business school at Darden. And then the majority of my career I actually spent in New York City. I was in investment banking for a long time in the media space, and then I went to Time Inc. So we were the publishing entity of Time Warner. So anything from People Magazine to Time to Sports Illustrated to InStyle. Spent a number of years there running corporate development for them, and then decided that although I lived a half a block from Central Park, and that was like my West Virginia roots, and that I needed to be near a park, I decided it was time to leave the big city and do something different, and ventured up to Boston, and was able to get kind of more of a mix of a city and public spaces here and parks and hikes and that sort of thing to remind me of back home. And ended up in the tech world here. It was something I had explored a lot at Time Inc. We looked at a lot of digital properties. And so I networked my way into the world here and ended up at a small company called SpringPad that was a personal organizer, which was really the seed of what sparked my idea for Portico. And I know we'll talk more about that.
Jacqueline, I love that. And I love the transition moment you just described to us. Could we dive a little deeper? I think everyone is interested in sort of that transition you made from a very successful corporate career all the way through to this place you find yourselves as an entrepreneur. What are some of the factors that you might share with everyone who's listening that's helped you successfully transition between the two, oftentimes disparate universes of work?
Sure. I mean, the first thing is, I think, Sarah, at some point in time in your life, you learn that you need to follow your heart more than your mind. And that's what led me out of New York City. As much as I loved the city, I had a yearning to do something different and knew I would always regret it if I didn't. And that was part of the move up to Boston. And actually forgot to mention, you need to get sidetracked at some point in time, too. So I got sidetracked and went to culinary school for 4 months. But to your more specific question, I think you need to know who you are as a person. So I'm a learner and I'm a doer, which means I constantly need a new challenge. And that's something that while you can find it in the corporate world, and I could find it in something like corporate development where I'm bouncing around with the different properties within Time Inc., it's something that works perfectly well in a startup. And so that's a personality that transfers across those lines that doesn't work for everyone. There are corporate people in this world, there are startup people in this world, and then there are those of us who don't mind. The other thing is around what's your passion and what's your passion point. I couldn't work for just any startup. That's not my mentality. It's really making sure that I believe in the mission of the company and what they're trying to create. And then I think there's some good things that you can bring from the corporate world over to startup world. One of which is, I mean this in a nice way, but around the professionalism. There are a lot of things that I learned growing up in a big corporate world about networking, management, interactions, processes. And those are things that sometimes when you arrive in a startup world, you need to implement. In those early days, you're just kind of scrambling to do everything, and then you need to implement some of that along the way. And then the last thing that I would say is thinking about an approach. So, and this was true in corporate for me too, but my approach in the corporate world was that I didn't know everything. I had experts that I had to pull in on every deal that I dealt with, and that's the same in startup world. And so that mentality came over. Someone I saw today on LinkedIn mentioned it as gather, ask, and do, and that's very much my motto. So I gather a lot of information about a question that I have, I do my research, then I talk to experts, and then I make my decision. So some of those traits kind of transfer from and made it easier for me to kind of move from one to the other.
I love that. And I love how you just slipped in that you did go to culinary school, by the way. And that's
Sure.
probably another discussion for another day, how you wove that into what is a busy, undoubtedly busy day. And I think that's our question for all of us who are aspiring entrepreneurs. This notional idea of being a lifelong learner, um, finding your passion, but then also having the self-discipline to go after that idea and do so with agency and accountability. And as the CEO, obviously, you have your sleeves, your fingers, excuse me, and everything. You've rolled up your sleeves. I think I'm really interested in how, and I think others are, in this world, particularly where we are, how are you keeping yourself focused? How are you remaining productive? What are some of those tricks that are so critical for entrepreneurs to know?
Sure. There's a couple things that I definitely think about, and particularly given the last year, I actually wrote about this last spring, right after we started our lockdown. For me, it's become meditation. And for each person, it's different. And you can start with just 3 minutes a day, but I've noticed days where I do 15 minutes, I'm calmer and I actually get more done. And I've started trying to have the mentality of I have all the time in the world, as opposed to, oh no, I'm late, I'm rushed. And it's a simple little difference, but what it does is I find it calms me down such that I actually think about what I need to grab before I walk out the door. And there's not this flurry in my head where I end up forgetting something. So one is just whatever your strategy is, whether it's a 15-minute walk in the morning for your meditation or something else, kind of doing that. A second one, because as a CEO and a startup founder, there is so much that we do, is to time block. And so if I'm working on something that's marketing related and all of a sudden something product related pops into my head, I write it on a piece of paper. Now, it does end up with lots of little scribbles like this over time, but it gets it out of my head and down somewhere where I won't forget it. And then for me, what I've found is in a quieter time, I go back through those notes and I move them to where they need to be, to whatever list it is or to whatever person it needs to go to. But you also have to really rely on your team and have faith in who they are and let them run. It's what they want to do. Give them guidance, give them direction, and then let them step up and kind of run with it.
Yeah. I love everything you just rolled into that short statement, Jacqueline, because it makes you realize the day-to-day of an entrepreneur, it is so packed. You mentioned from meditation comes creativity. You called it marketing. Product design ideas, come across your mind during the day and they need to be implemented. You mentioned your team and giving them the ability to run, which tells me you're a CEO who shares guidance and strategy, but also camaraderie. I wonder if of all those things that, frame you out as such a good entrepreneur, is there anything that you particularly like to do more than others? Like, what is sort of your favorite aspect of being an entrepreneur?
That's an interesting question. From my experience with Portico, it's actually creating a product and then being able to show it to people and hear about how they use it. So that's really been the beauty of it. And that's something that it was harder for me to do in corporate world. And it's something I've really seen with Portico. We were chatting with a user last week, and she said to us that Portico has been her lifeline during lockdown. She lives in southwestern England, and they've had some pretty severe lockdowns. And she tried crocheting, knitting, all sorts of other hobbies, but really she loves planning travel. And so she visits Portico daily. And she said it multiple times. She's like, it's amazing. I love it. And it's been my lifeline. And I have to say, it just warmed my heart to hear that from someone that I had never met before. She found us online, and that's really what we want to do, is we want to help people be able to dream more easily about travel, to more easily plan travel, and kind of stay inspired about all of that. So that's probably the best part.
Yeah, Jacqueline, just in this period of COVID where we have been isolated um, where we're still in our homes, but we're dreaming big dreams. I never really thought about my own love of Portico and your application as also being just good for my mental health.
Mm-hmm.
But I just realized why I'm so satiated when I go out to the Portico app. I wonder if that was your vision. Did you have another vision about the company when you started it?
Yeah, no, that is a beauty of what's happened in the last year, I would say, and finding some silver linings. And thinking about Portico overall, for us, we really wanted to be your central thread to your entire life of travel. So what we've found is that the market is relatively fragmented, and there are a ton of great sources of content. There's a bunch of different places to book things, and that will always exist and should always exist. But because of it, we end up with our ideas just scattered around. So they're on paper notes like I have, they're bookmarked web pages, they're on emails and texts, and they're just kind of all over the place. And it ends up creating worry and extra time for us and all sorts of manual work. So we're really trying to create that central thread where whether it's just an idea somebody mentions to you about a restaurant that you should go someday and you have no idea when, you can save that. You can invite your friends in and more actively save ideas and plan your days and kind of get inspiration from within Portico, see things on maps, be able to do all of that as well, but then also to remember afterwards. So I've traveled quite a bit, and I remember early on when I would go to Rome, I'd be like, oh, near the Pantheon, around the corner over here is this cool little coffee shop with just a bunch of old Italian men at the bar ordering their espressos. But I never could remember the name of it. So I want to be able to remember the name of it in Portico as well. So it's really that central thread where we know you'll bounce out and back, but to be able to save all your thoughts so that you don't forget them and it's easier to plan and kind of organize, because we do that in disparate spurts. That's really the goal of Portico. And as we do that, the kind of the icing on the cake that we want to do is to be able to better inspire you through the community and community stories. So if you're a hiker or if you're a biker or if you're an artist, we can help find other people in the community who have gone to places that we think you might find interesting and then surface that information to you. So you control everything, public and private. We're not trying to push anybody, but we want to get people excited about travel and getting under the skin of cultures and learning about the place they go.
I can't help but tell you the joy in your face as you're describing what you're giving your users is something that like we all must have in our day job.
Yeah.
We all need to really look at that. And you talked about it as passion, but it's very clear. And I'm getting a couple texts of inbound questions of people who
Sure.
are listening to us. One of them, it really is about sort of the user experience. And it just really is. How do you respond to such a visceral moment? You had a user who said, I needed you during COVID, and you just talked about it in your own terms about passion. Well, the question is, how are you responsive to user experience, and how did you develop it in the Portico sort of, it is a community.
Yeah, sure. So a couple things. So one is we found that unfortunately what most of us were doing in planning travel was very manual. And so it's actually a Google Doc or spreadsheet and then Google Maps and back and forth. So primarily what we've tried to create is this platform that's for a kind of do-it-yourself researcher, but to make it as flexible as possible. So we constantly, every couple months we'll send out surveys to users and ask them for their feedback, because there's just little tweaks, because every person thinks differently. Some people are visual and call our ideas section like a Pinterest board, but then other people are map people. So we have a map people. Now we've been asked for a list view. So part of it is just in these conversations, whether it's someone, we do blind user testing too. So someone who knows nothing about Portico and kind of watch how they walk through the app. And we take all of that feedback as to ways to change things. Our goal really is to make it as intuitive as possible, but it's for all these different mindsets. So there's really like 50 million ways to do stuff in Portico. So that's one way. There's a contact us form. People can reach out to us. We're happy to hop on the phone with people anytime. And then we've been doing some of these focus groups as well. So we do have the community stories that come up that you can share. So you can share your favorites with friends, and those show in the community. There'll be more down the road on that front, but we're kind of slowly moving into that. We want to make sure we create value in the other aspects first. So.
I love that. And I'll tell you, my personal way that I plan my travel is I rip pictures out of magazines, which is, just so you know, that's why I was again so happy when you built Portico, because I have countless files from 2007 being like, I must go to this bakery in Tel Aviv, and now I can organize it.
You just hit the plus button, search for the name of the bakery, and we'll pull in the rest for you.
I love it. Let me ask you another, if I may. The questions from the audience are just fantastic. One of the questions is about sort of the experience, your own personal experience with travel. Mm-hmm. And it did very much pinpoint, no surprise. Did your experience with West Virginia and its history of tourism play a part in you going into the travel tech space?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. In a sense, it informed some of what I'm doing. So what I would say is, I grew up in a household where there were pictures of penguins on the wall from Antarctica, because my father had been in the Navy. So he had gone to Antarctica and he'd gone to Japan, and we ate on China from Japan on special occasions, So between those two, there was certainly a love of it. He had a lust for it, and kind of talked about it a lot growing up. I spent my summers in the eastern part of the state, just outside of Lewisburg, at a camp, sleeping right next to the Greenbrier River. So that gave me kind of the hiking outdoorsy side. Mm-hmm. And for me, there was always just this desire to better understand people. I had a father who was a minister too. So how do you understand people and who they are and kind of how they work? And so there's a piece of needing to travel to then be able to come back home again and kind of take the learnings. So I discuss it as what I love sitting in coffee shops when I travel, because I love watching people, and I love watching how they're similar to us and how they're different from me. And in doing so, I feel like I gain a better respect for who they are, but it's always trying to get a little bit off the beaten path and kind of understand who people are. And that's the same thing with getting people into West Virginia, because I think people misunderstand West Virginia sometimes, and they think we're just about the Gauley River and whitewater rafting in the fall, and there's really so much more there to experience. So
yeah, I feel like I should share with you, because you and I can't see the comments that are going on while we're talking, but I just got a text from our amazing team at Vantage, and they said, just to let you know, there's a comment that says the fact that this is a community-based mindset, amazing. Mm-hmm. So what you just talked about and the relevance we have to return to travel, to also find ourselves and sense that community, really, just for me, it warms my heart. And I think all of us as we dream about a better future. One of the questions, sorry, I'm going to go back to the questions you and I talked about, but
Sure,
I just want to make sure we weave in, because there's lots of questions out there. Does your technology support someone who is a travel planner for a group? What's the robustness of that experience? Can groups come together on Portico?
Yeah, sure. So as an individual user, it's all under your control. So number one, each trip that you create, you choose if it's private or public. You also choose whether or not to invite people. So you can invite all your friends. Everybody saves ideas in the same place. You can favorite them so that people understand kind of what you want to do. You can hack chat for now and just put a note in there and go back and forth. It's all real-time collaboration. So if you and I had a trip up for Portico and you added something, it would pop up on my screen, which says, and say added by Sarah, so that I know that you just put that in there. So for group travel, it works. 25% of our users collaborate on trips already. And that it ranges from 2 people to 14 people. It's averages about 3 people on a trip. So it's a really good way to not have to email. I used to joke on some of my trips, somebody would email and be like, what's the name of the house? Like, where are we staying again? What's the address? And then like the next day, somebody else would text that same question to the person. So if you're trying to organize like that, if you're trying to organize across cities, across generations and families, it's a really good way to have all the details so people know where to go, and then also to get an idea as to what people want to do. So I think that was the question around group travel. We do also have some people hacking us and using us as a travel agent where they're planning travel for other people, and it's a group, so they're just doing that in a slightly different way. But
yeah, you can see there's a lot of interest on actually getting onto Portico and getting in the questions and getting their hands around it. Do you have any tips for sort of the first step one might take when they log on to Portico, when they use the application?
Yeah. We are working on that right now, actually. So as I said before, it's a bit of a DIY kind of platform. So when you go in and you create a trip to a place, you'll actually have a blank screen, because we're assuming that you have all these sources of content that you want to start to aggregate stuff in. And you can add things from within Portico. You'll see a big blue plus button. So whether it's the name of a restaurant, whether it's the URL for a website, just to note, we have a Chrome extension, we have a Firefox extension, we also have an iOS app, and we're in the share menu. So if you're on Instagram and you want to share in your favorite photo, you can do it that way too. So one, it really is to just start saving ideas and then start playing around, like click on the map and you'll see all your ideas that are saved there. If you really are struggling, go to our Discover section, and in Discover, we have a bunch of articles that we've written recently. We have some other user stories to inspire you. We have destination guides on a couple places if you look under destinations, and anything that you see in those articles that you think is interesting, just look for the little plus button, and when you hit that, you can add it right into a trip, and that way you can start getting some ideas saved.
It sounds absolutely amazing. I think the website has been posted. I saw that too. So if anyone wants to click in and follow along while you're giving us a primer on being an entrepreneur, a woman founder, and also a tech guru here on how it works.
What I would also say is the first email that you get is directly from me. So anybody just feel free to reply to it. We love feedback. I'll hop on the phone with anybody to show them stuff, because the more feedback we get, the better we can make the product and the platform. So.
Yeah, I love that. It goes back to that question we had about responsiveness to the user, and if you know the functionality and you're learning as you're going, which just to kind of go to the earlier part of our conversation, I think is a hallmark of an incredible entrepreneur, to always want to persistently take that continuous learnings.
Yeah, it's interesting. When we launched, my goal was to make it as intuitive as possible. So there's actually very little what we call onboarding or kind of teaching in the product right now. And so that's why I say just reach out to me, because if we can make it more and more intuitive, that's what we want to do. And then we'll start to layer on those little tips and tricks and that sort of thing for people, to show them the ins and outs.
Yeah, I think I love that. Because now you've got this seamless experience that you're striving for. I think one of the things I'm taking from the questions that are coming in, and we have some more wanting you to talk a little bit more about yourself personally,
Sure.
which we'll circle back to. But this, that there is this appetite for travel, right? We're getting these questions, as we come out of out of COVID, out of being, a bit on lockdown, what do you think? What's going to happen to travel? Are we, will we, Katie bar the door? Will we proceed with caution? What's your thinking there?
Yeah, so it's individual in terms of what your appetite is. So what's interesting is to me is COVID actually sparked trip planning. So our community tripled in 2020, and since the holidays and vaccines are known and kind of there's a light at the end of the tunnel, it's grown. It's doubled in growth. So people are dying to get out on the road again, without a doubt. What we're seeing for this year is a huge number of road trips. So if you looked 2 years ago, road trips barely made it on the map for us. And now, if I look at just the title, 10% of our trips are road trips at least. We're seeing national parks, particularly some of the big ones out west, so Yellowstone, Grand Canyon. We're seeing a return to what I call the classic favorites. So it could be that somebody loves New York and they want to go back there, or they want to go back to Paris or London. But there's a lot of activity. But if I look at Portico, only probably 50% of the trips are for the second half of this year, and then the rest are for after that in 2022 and beyond. So it sort of depends. I think people will start more locally. There will be more road trips or places that you can fly within the country, particularly my gut says through the end of this year, given the variants and some other things that we're seeing. But what we started doing in our newsletter actually is we did a big trip series, because we're like, okay, well now while you're not doing these trips, and you can't really land in London and just, decide what to do then. It's too complicated now with COVID. We're actually trying to encourage people to, one, travel locally, do your road trips, do your short flights, but plan big trips. So if you're going to go to Japan or New Zealand, or like next week we're talking about Patagonia in our newsletter, like those trips that you have to plan a year or two in advance. And so take some time now to do that sort of thing. But some people are already back on the road. Definitely a lot, I think, will be on this summer. Road trips were huge last summer as well. So people are just deciding how they're comfortable doing it with vaccines, and we just need to be extra careful still. So
yeah. I'm gonna tee up on what a natural, I think, question for you. You started it this way. There is a new national park in the country where people might be interested in going. I don't know if you if you have any opinions on that, but certainly, West Virginia, we've just been in a rising interest moment for our outdoor economy, our national park. Any thoughts there on sort of, this macro interest in the outdoors, and then, more specifically around West Virginia?
Yeah, there's a huge interest in the outdoors, and I think that will continue. People don't necessarily know open rates, but open rates for most companies are 20 to 30% on emails. We did an email on hiking last summer, and it was 65% in terms of an open rate. Like people,
Wow.
it was astonishing. So people really gravitated towards the outside. We talked about forest bathing. So there's actually a concept of being able to get out in a forest and kind of what it can do for you emotionally. It's a really interesting Japanese concept. So I think that's here to stay. I think people got used to it. They saw it last year. I see it even just around Boston in terms of how many people are out in the local little hiking areas that are kind of tucked into suburbs. That's definitely staying this summer. And I think we'll go beyond that as well. And so I think West Virginia has a really great opportunity to play in that more, particularly for people on the East Coast and for road trippers, and to be able to advertise that more. And whether it's the luxury tree houses that are coming next year that are going to be really cool, or whether it's whitewater rafting or hikes in the Allegheny Mountains, or starting to visit some of the artisanal products that are happening in West Virginia that I love. Like I wanted to go in my kitchen and get my J.Q. Dickinson salts that I, or there's the new Appalachian Botanical Company that's doing the lavender fields. Like I think all of that is a really great opportunity to revitalize parts of West Virginia and kind of blend it in with the hiking and other opportunities that are there for people to see. There's so much history in the state too, as well, that I think we could really take advantage of.
Yeah, I do too. And I think we have this marvelous message about West Virginia. And, the new travel tagline in West Virginia is "You belong." And I think we all crave that sense of belonging. And, this concept again that you've brought forward, that traveling lets you be part of a community. It is something to observe and to see. One question that has been posed to you, there is this idea around, do you have any partners, either it's agencies or groups, that you would suggest people join based on their travel choices? I would say go to Portico, but maybe you have a better answer, a broader answer to that question.
Partners or agencies.
Do you, yeah, partner with any? Yeah.
Okay, sorry. So what we have, the approach we have taken, as we do our destination guides, people will see, is to partner with local groups that do small group tours, and we're intent on that. So, if I'm traveling in Europe in particular, context travel is one I really love. Paris Muse is one in Paris. There used to be one called Sidewalk Tours, and kind of, so for me, it goes to that community of how do I find a group of 8 or 10 people that where I can be led around by an expert. Travel with locals is another good one. To have them walk with me like a friend, where I can really ask questions, as opposed to being in a group of 50 where I'm kind of listening on a phone and just getting little bits and pieces. So we really, look to those partners to help us as we write our travel guides. You'll see one we just did on Mexico City. So they wrote about the fine dining institutions in Mexico City, and also all the tacos that you need to try when you're there, and the different varieties of them. They wrote that content to help educate people and inform them and inspire them and get them excited about a trip to Mexico City. That's why it's there. They also happen to do local tours. And so those are some of the ones that people can find on Portico and that we really focus on.
Yeah, just a tremendous source of resource. And again, this idea about sort of the community focused
Yeah.
moment. It's really what I hear you saying is immersing us in a culture, in an environment that we might otherwise not be able to see on our own. When we travel, I love this reminder that, it is even just down, as you said, to sitting in a coffee shop and experiencing the fragrance of a coffee that smells different. Let me go to this other audience question.
Sure.
I'm curious if you're thinking about developing an SDK in the future, since you're community focused. Or any, I guess, form of technology that might add into the sort of ability to work more collaboratively, or travel, let me not say work, travel more collaboratively with others.
Yeah. So what I will say is we will follow what makes sense for our users and our community.
Mhm.
So one of the things we very consciously have always tried to do is to put the user front and center and what can be helpful for them. So we do want to make it easier to talk to other travelers about your trip and to kind of have some community aspects there. And so we're brainstorming and thinking about a lot of things there, but some of our questions go to how much should we recreate ourselves versus integrate into what people are already using. So I would say that we have discussion about that. Exactly what path it leads down remains to be seen. But frankly, it's also driven by our user requests. So we have a great big, we use Airtable, and we have a great big list of every single thing that any user has ever asked for. And the more people that ask for the same thing, the higher it goes up. And we'll implement it. I mean, there are things that we've put in that I took out of designs a long time ago because I didn't think they made sense, but so many people asked for it that I was like, okay, put it in,
I love that. I'm going to do a shout out to I actually just realized who the question came from. Jacqueline, we have this fabulous entrepreneur, Justin Whitman, who's in our community Advantage, and he's building a platform for music and for cultural events. And I just want to acknowledge to you who he is, who asked the question about the SDK, because he actually says, in continuation of his question, wouldn't it be great to see a travel site implement what I'll call the Portico method, which is the ability to create this methodology around community interaction and travel, and like really think about it as I think we seek to be more connected, not just in our own backyards, but as we're on vacation. So anyways, I just wanted to tell you, you're now asking to do sort of like the stamp of approval through Portico. But Justin, thank you for that awesome question. And as we kind of wind down our time, Jacqueline, I want to go back to some questions that others are asking about your journey. No pun intended, by the way, since we're talking about travel. But I do think there's a wonderful way for us to kind of conclude our conversation. And it's really a question that came in. Do you have any advice for young entrepreneurs? And then as a young female entrepreneur, because it may be a little bit different, but how do you think about getting to this place where you're pursuing your passion, you're building something that brings such joy and comfort to others, and you're doing it successfully? Any advice for the young entrepreneur?
Um, yes, and I can talk to more of them later, but I mean, there is self-reflection to understand what you're comfortable with. So for me, my approach was, you know, having a successful career, saving a lot, and then deciding to be an entrepreneur in something that I was passionate about. So that's one approach. And I think you need to make sure you know kind of where your own mind is in terms of what your financial comfort is and what security you need. The other approach is to try it in your 20s when you can live off pasta and water and you know you don't mind sleeping 10 to a room or whatever. That's a different time to try it. So part of that you just need to think about on your own and kind of where your perspective is. But really, I think the most important thing is getting mentors around you and getting people who will give you honest feedback. And that's really the most important thing. You want cheerleaders who will keep you going and who kind of support your idea, but you also want people who will have a hard conversation with you if they're not sure your idea will work. And kind of how do you get, some people talk about building a personal board. It's almost like you need a personal board as you think about becoming an entrepreneur, who can kind of help guide and mentor you as you go along in the process. There's a lot you can do to play around with stuff and explore before you ever quit a job if you want to be an entrepreneur. I mean, I taught myself how to wireframe. Actually, I should pull up pictures. My original ones were like lists of pieces of paper with color-coded notes for all the different things and all the different aspects of the business that I thought about. And then I have a roll of paper with Post-its on it, different colors for screens on what Portico would be and interactions with people. And then I taught myself how to wireframe, and I did user tests of my own. There's a lot of stuff that you can do to kind of learn about your idea and test your idea before you ever get to the point of deciding to do it. But definitely, one, get people around you who will be constructive in terms of how they work with you. The other thing I would say is if you're deciding to do a pure tech one and you have the opportunity, go work for a tech company that you admire and you respect and work for them a couple years and just soak it all up and learn everything you can and then embark out on your own to do your idea. You'll also have a great network at that point in time of people that you can leverage for a little bit of design work, a little bit of dev work, or something else. So
I love that. I think as you think about those continuous factors you just said that drive success in entrepreneurship, it also underscores what you started our conversation with, Jacqueline, and that is be passionate. Like find that passion, what it is, because you can work a couple years in a tech company and learn. So when you're on the other side, you're ready to pursue it. And we've just been so honored to learn from you, to see that passion, to know that there's a world beyond us that we're going to see and do. And thank you for being who you are as an entrepreneur, but also representing West Virginia too, and those roots so well and so globally. So thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. It's been an honor to be here. I mean, my West Virginia roots are here and always will be. And it's been fun to reconnect, and I encourage it. Passion is really important, but I encourage anybody who has it to go for it. Just, if you don't, you may always wonder what would have happened, and better to know you can always change path. Look at my career. I've had so many different pivots. You can always do that as well. So, but it's been really exciting to see some of the wonderful things that have happened in West Virginia the last couple of years. And I can't wait to see what's going to happen with Vantage Ventures and all that they can do for the state.
Thank you. Come home and visit. So, all right, everybody. Jacqueline, we'll talk to you soon.
Okay, great. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.